She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even knock on the door. Amara Brooks stood in the hallway of a penthouse apartment worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, staring through a 2-inch gap at the man she loved, the man who had told her she was his everything, tangled in the sheets with her own sister. And Vanessa, because she had always been the cruelest person in any room she entered, turned her head, looked Amara dead in the eyes, and smiled. That smile cost Jitai everything. He just didn't know it yet. If you've ever loved someone so completely that losing them didn't just break your heart, it broke your entire idea of who you were, stay with me. Because this story doesn't end in that bedroom. It ends 5 years later, in a country Jitai had no business finding, with 2 little boys who had his eyes and her courage, and a war that nearly killed all of them. Watch until the end. Hit the like button, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened at 11:47 p.m. Amara knew the exact time because she'd checked her phone in the lobby, debating whether to take the stairs. She'd been at the university library for 11 hours straight, hunched over a translation project that paid almost nothing but kept her mind occupied, kept her from thinking too hard about the life she was building here. The borrowed apartment, the borrowed city, the borrowed future that technically belonged to a man she wasn't sure she fully understood yet. Seoul did that to you. It made everything feel borrowed. She'd been in South Korea for 3 years, long enough to navigate the subway without panicking, long enough to order food in passable Korean and understand when the woman at the convenience store was being rude versus genuinely confused by her accent, long enough to have built a small, manageable life inside Jitai's enormous, unmanageable world. The elevator opened. The hallway was dim, the way it always was at night. Whoever designed the lighting in this building believed in atmosphere over visibility, which Amara had always found slightly irritating. She moved toward the apartment door with her bag on one shoulder, her key already in her hand, replaying the sentence structure of a legal document she'd been wrestling with all afternoon. She almost didn't notice the shoes. 2 pairs, side by side near the door. Hers would make 3. Jitai's shoes she recognized. Italian leather, black, the kind of shoes that cost more than her rent back in Atlanta. The other pair she knew too. White sneakers with a gold stripe along the sole. Limited edition. The left one had a small scuff near the toe from when Vanessa had kicked the leg of a bar stool 2 years ago in Chicago, laughing too loud at her own joke. Amara stood there in the hallway for a long moment. She didn't think about betrayal. Not yet. She thought, there's an explanation. She thought, Vanessa flew in early and surprised us. She thought, I should have texted. She pushed open the door. The living room was empty. The kitchen light was on, a bottle of wine half finished on the counter. Not Jitai's usual brand, which meant someone had brought it. The balcony doors were shut. The city bled orange and white through the floor-to-ceiling glass, 60 floors of Seoul pressing upward like it wanted to pierce something. The hallway to the bedroom was short. The door was not fully closed. Amara walked toward it the way you walk toward something you already know is going to destroy you. Slowly, because your body understands what your mind hasn't caught up to yet. 3 steps. 2. She stopped. The gap was maybe 2 inches. She could hear breathing. She could see the edge of the bed. The silk sheets Jitai had bought because he said cotton felt like sandpaper to him. An absurd, extravagant thing she'd teased him about for weeks. The sheets were twisted. The lamp on his side was still on. And then she saw them. She didn't look for more than 4 seconds. She didn't need to. The image carved itself into the back of her skull with the precision of something designed specifically to be unforgettable. Jitai, the man who had looked at her 6 months ago on a rooftop in Itaewon and said, "You're the first person I've ever wanted to keep, asleep or nearly asleep, his face buried in the pillow. And beside him, propped up on one elbow, looking directly at the 2-inch gap in the door, with an expression that was not surprise, not guilt, not anything close to shame, Vanessa, her little sister, younger by 3 years, prettier by every metric the world uses to measure prettiness, the one who'd grown up in their mother's arms while Amara grew up in the library, the one who'd borrowed Amara's clothes, Amara's friends, Amara's ideas, and always managed to make them look like they'd been hers all along. Vanessa looked at Amara through that 2-inch gap and smiled. Not a small smile, not a nervous, caught-in-the-act smile. A slow, deliberate, full-faced smile. The kind that said, "I wanted you to see this, and it took you long enough." Amara pulled back from the door. She stood in the hallway for exactly 8 seconds. She counted them. 8 full seconds of standing in a borrowed hallway, in a borrowed city with the borrowed life crumbling into borrowed nothing around her. Then she turned, walked back through the living room, picked up her bag from where she'd dropped it near the entry, and stepped into the elevator. She did not cry in the elevator. She cried in the lobby bathroom, the kind of crying that doesn't make noise, just shakes, just tears and locked jaw and both hands pressed flat against a cold tile wall. Then she stopped. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She said nothing out loud, but something in her face rearranged itself that night, and it never went back to the way it was before. She left the building at midnight. By 2 a.m., she was in a hotel in Mapugu, paying cash. By 4 a.m., she was online using an incognito browser, looking at flights. By sunrise, she was already thinking about the ways that a person can become someone else if they move fast enough and are careful enough and want it badly enough. She was thinking about how many countries she could name where Jite's reach didn't extend. She was thinking about what she owned versus what she'd been given, and how fast she could get to the former and leave behind the latter. She was thinking about all of this when she realized, with the kind of cold, clinical clarity that only arrives in the space after catastrophic grief, that she'd missed her period by 11 days. She bought the test at a 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks from the hotel. She took it alone in a bathroom the size of a closet, 2 lines. She sat on the edge of the tub for a very long time. Then she stood up, wrapped the test in toilet paper, buried it in the bottom of the trash, and went back to the desk where her laptop was open and her credit card was out. She booked a flight to Lisbon. One way. Kang Jite woke up at 7:15 a.m. to the sound of his phone. He answered it without fully opening his eyes, barking a response in Korean to whoever was on the other end before registering that it was one of his mid-level managers, not his lieutenant, and that the call was about a shipping discrepancy that could wait. He ended it, dropped the phone on the nightstand. He became aware that Vanessa was still in the bed beside him. That awareness arrived not with guilt, but with the flat, functional discomfort of a man who had done something he already understood to be a mistake and was now calculating the consequences. Jite operated that way, had always operated that way, with the machine precision of someone who'd been trained from adolescence to see every situation as a sequence of decisions and outcomes. His father had done that to him. His father's father before that. Emotion was a current. You could use it or be used by it. He'd learned to use it, but Vanessa complicated that framework. He sat up, ran a hand over his face. She was awake, watching him with the particular expression she wore when she wanted to be misread. Loose, easy, no agenda. He'd seen it 3 times in the 2 months since she'd arrived in Seoul, supposedly to visit her sister, supposedly to see the city. He'd known from the first week that the visit wasn't entirely about that. "Amara came home last night," he said. It wasn't a question. Vanessa tilted her head. "What makes you think that?" "The door wasn't latched. I checked it before we—" He stopped. "I check everything." "She didn't come in." "She came to the door." Vanessa held his gaze for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt, not exactly. Something more calculated, more satisfied. He cataloged it, filed it away, said nothing about what it told him. He got out of bed, dressed with the efficiency of a man who wore his clothes like a uniform, and called Amara's number before he'd finished buttoning his shirt. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted. 3 words. "Are you okay?" No response. By 8 a.m., he was in his car, driver heading toward the university, because that was where she went. That was her rhythm. That was the gravity around which her days organized themselves. But the library hadn't seen her. The administrative office didn't have her scheduled until Thursday. Her graduate supervisor hadn't heard from her. He went to the apartment. He checked every room. Her clothes were still there, most of them. He was thorough enough to notice that the small leather bag she'd bought in a market in Insadong was gone. The external hard drive where she backed up her translation work was gone. The photo of her mother she kept on the nightstand, small, framed in wood, the only decorative object she'd insisted on, was gone. He stood in the bedroom for a long time. He called his head of security. A man named Park Seung-jin, who had worked for the Black Phoenix Syndicate for 11 years and had located missing persons in 4 countries. She left, Jite said. Park's voice was careful. Voluntarily? Yes. Do you want me to, find her? What Jite understood about himself, what he'd understood for a long time, in the private, ruthless inventory he conducted of his own character, was that he was not a good man. He was capable. He was disciplined. He was loyal to the people who earned his loyalty and merciless to everyone else. He ran the Black Phoenix Syndicate the way his father had built it, through fear leveraged against competence, through information gathered before it was needed, through the kind of patience that could hold a grudge across a decade and cash it in at exactly the right moment. But goodness was something different. Goodness required a consistency of intention that Jite had never possessed. He had gaps, dark ones, spaces between the version of himself he performed for the world and the version that made decisions in the back rooms of buildings that didn't officially exist. Amara was the only person who had ever walked into one of those gaps and not flinched. He'd met her at a charity event, the kind of polished, strategic philanthropy that powerful men use to launder their public image. And she'd been there translating for an NGO partnership that one of his legitimate businesses was nominally supporting. She was the worst thing that could happen to him at that particular moment in his life, completely unimpressed by him. Not hostile, not playing a game, just genuinely, absolutely uninterested in the fact that every other person in the room adjusted their posture when he walked in. She'd asked him if the crab canapes were any good because she was considering taking a plate to her colleague across the room. He'd said he didn't know, he hadn't tried them. She'd said that seemed like a waste of proximity, taken two, and walked away. He'd spent the next 3 months engineering reasons to be near her. He was not accustomed to having to engineer anything. By the 4th month, she'd agreed to dinner. By the 6th month, she was the closest thing he'd ever had to something real. He'd told her things he'd told no one, not strategic vulnerabilities, not operational details, but the other things. The weight of inheriting power before he wanted it. The particular loneliness of being feared by everyone around you. The memory of his mother, who had died when he was 9, and whose face he could only remember clearly in the second before he fell asleep. And she had listened the way she did everything, without performance, without trying to fix or reframe, just clear-eyed and present. He had, somewhere in those months, made the mistake of believing he deserved her. Now she was gone. And he didn't know yet that she'd been carrying his children when she walked out the door, but the absence itself was already doing something to him that he didn't have the vocabulary for. Not quite grief, not quite rage, something that lived in the space between them and was worse than either. He sat in his office at the top of the Phoenix Tower and stared at the city and calculated. She'd had maybe 7 or 8 hours before he noticed. If she moved immediately, and the empty nightstand told him she'd moved immediately, she could be out of the country. She had a passport. She had savings of her own. He'd offered to support her financially, and she'd taken the offer for rent but refused everything else. She had skills that were portable. Translation work could be done from anywhere. She could be anywhere. Sir? Park appeared at the door. Immigration has no record of her departing through Incheon or Gimpo last night. She's smart. She wouldn't use the main airports. Busan Port, possibly, or she took a domestic flight to a secondary city first. Pull all of it. Every transit hub. 6-hour window from midnight. The budget? Jitai looked at him. Park nodded. I'll start now. Amara landed in Lisbon at 6:40 a.m. local time, 31 hours after she'd walked away from that apartment door. She had 1,700 euros in cash, her laptop, her hard drive, her mother's photo, and a decision that had calcified somewhere over the Indian Ocean into something so firm and permanent she couldn't find its edges. She was not going back. She had run the calculation the way her mind always ran calculations, methodically, accounting for variables, testing different outcomes against each other. If she confronted Jite, what happened? Best case, he was genuinely remorseful. It had been a single catastrophic mistake. They tried to repair it. But repair meant trust. And trust with Jite had always been a complicated structure. She'd known from early on what he was, what the Black Phoenix meant, what those late-night calls and coded conversations in rooms she wasn't invited into signified. She told herself that she could love the man without endorsing the machine. She told herself that the Jitai, who pressed his mouth to her temple at 3 a.m. and said stay, was more real than the Jitai who made people disappear. Vanessa had corrected that miscalculation efficiently. Because Vanessa didn't make mistakes. Vanessa made choices. And leaving the door unlatched, positioning herself where she'd be seen, meeting Amara's eyes with that slow, terrible smile, none of that was accident. That was a message, and the message was, I did this on purpose and I wanted you to know. Which meant either Jite had pursued her sister, or Vanessa had pursued Jite, or, worst, most probable, they'd arrived at each other through some mutual gravitational pull that Amara's presence had only temporarily disrupted. Either way, the betrayal was architectural. It wasn't a crack in something solid. It was a foundation that had never been what she thought it was. She didn't cry on the plane. She didn't sleep either. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the dark outside the window and did the other calculation, the harder one. The test had said 2 lines. 2 lines meant 6 weeks, maybe 7. 7 weeks was still early. There were options, and she listed them in her mind with the detachment of someone making a business decision, because detachment was the only way she could face it at all. But somewhere over Turkey, with the cabin dark around her and a child sleeping across the aisle, and the engine noise filling the space where her thoughts would otherwise get too loud, she felt something shift. Not a decision, exactly. More like an acknowledgement. The way your body knows something before your mind is ready to say it. She pressed her hand very briefly, very lightly, against her stomach. Then she looked back out the window. She said nothing. To no one. That Portugal was not a plan. It was a landing point, a place where the money she had would last longer than most of Europe, and the weather would not punish her. And the bureaucracy moved slowly enough that a woman with the right paperwork could build a paper life in the gaps. She spent the first 2 weeks in Lisbon, a hostel, then a cheap room in a woman's apartment in Moraria, learning the transit routes, buying a local sim under a name that was close enough to hers to feel manageable and different enough to matter. She'd changed her surname in her head long before she changed it on paper. Brooks became Ward. Amara stayed Amara, because she wasn't willing to give them that too. She found translation work immediately. There was always translation work if you spoke English and Korean and could turn documents around fast, and she could. Corporate contracts, legal filings, academic papers. She built a client list through a freelance platform using a professional email that traced back to nothing personal. In the 8th week, she went to a clinic. The doctor confirmed it. She was 8 weeks and 4 days along. She sat in the examination room in the thin paper gown and listened to the information given to her in Portuguese, which she didn't yet speak well enough to follow entirely, and then she asked if the doctor spoke English, and the doctor said a little, and they managed. Twins, the doctor said, and then because she could see Amara's expression, she said it again more gently. 2 heartbeats, both strong. Amara sat with that information for the rest of the day. She walked back to Moraria along the waterfront, past tourists and fishermen and old men playing cards at folding tables, and she walked for a long time. The city was beautiful in the way that places with deep, tired history are beautiful. Not cheerful, not optimistic, but enduring. Scarred. Still standing. She went home. She made tea. She sat at the table where she'd been translating a contract about shipping insurance, which now seemed like the most irrelevant document in the world. She thought about calling her mother. Her mother would tell her to come home. Home being Atlanta, home being the 2-bedroom apartment in East Point where Amara had grown up, and where her mother still lived, and where Vanessa had grown up also, which meant it wasn't home anymore, not entirely. She thought about calling G-Tai. She picked up her phone twice, put it back down twice. She did not call anyone. She opened her laptop and started researching small towns on the Portuguese coast. By the 3rd month of his search, G-Tai had spent what most government agencies allocate for international surveillance operations. Park Sung-jin had good people. They were thorough, and they were discreet, and they followed the threads with the kind of systematic patience that the work required. They traced her flight from Seoul, not directly, but through a connecting city, as he'd suspected. She'd taken a domestic bus to Daejeon and caught a flight from Cheongju International, which was exactly the kind of routing you used when you knew someone might be checking the major hubs. Smart. He'd noted that with something that was adjacent to admiration and very close to anguish. The flight had taken her to Istanbul, Istanbul to Lisbon. In Lisbon, she disappeared. He sent men to Lisbon. They showed her photograph, thus the most recent one he had, taken 3 months before she left. At a gallery opening he'd brought her to, her head tilted slightly, eyes already looking at something off to the side of the camera. They showed it to hostel operators, apartment landlords, clinic receptionists. They found the hostel. They found the woman in Moraria who said she'd had a tenant by that name who'd left after a month, paid in full, no forwarding address, very quiet, cold trail. Gite stared at the map of Portugal on his wall for a long time. He thought about the woman he'd chosen to betray. He thought about that in the flat, functional way he thought about his failures. Not to flagellate himself, but because understanding the mechanism of a mistake was the only way to ensure it didn't compound into something worse. He had made choices. He had made them in full knowledge that they were choices, which was the thing about his transgressions that he couldn't soften with narrative. He hadn't been confused, hadn't been manipulated, hadn't been ambushed by circumstance. He had chosen. He thought about Vanessa Brooks, who had left Seoul 2 days after Amara, who had sent him a single text that said sorry and then never contacted him again, which told him everything about what it had been and nothing about why. He thought about Amara's face the last time he'd really looked at it, not that last night, but the week before, in the kitchen of the apartment at 7 a.m., when she'd been annotating something and had looked up and found him watching her and had said what, and he'd said nothing, and she'd shaken her head slightly and gone back to work. He wished he'd said something other than nothing. He kept searching. The twins were born in February in a hospital in a town called Cascais, 40 minutes west of Lisbon on the coast road. Amara was alone for it. She had a midwife she'd seen throughout the pregnancy, a Portuguese woman named Beatrice, who had warm hands and a patient manner and who spoke enough English to get them through the appointments. She had a neighbor, Dora, an older woman who grew tomatoes on her balcony and had started bringing Amara food in the 5th month without being asked, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in a long time. Dora drove her to the hospital. The labor took 19 hours. The first boy arrived at 4:17 a.m. He screamed immediately, which the nurses said was excellent, and they handed him to her, this small, furious creature, and she felt something fracture open in her chest. Not break, fracture. The distinction matters. Because a fracture is a break that still holds together, that is still structurally present, just changed. She named him Micah. The second arrived 40 minutes later. He didn't scream. He just looked at her, with wide dark eyes that were still unfocused and still somehow, impossibly, felt like they were already trying to categorize the world. She named him Jordan. She lay in the hospital bed in the early morning with both of them on her chest and the winter light beginning at the window, and she thought, Jitai. She thought his name with a clarity she hadn't allowed herself since leaving. She thought, he doesn't know. He doesn't know any of this. He doesn't know there are 2 of them. Doesn't know they exist. Doesn't know that one screams and one just looks. She thought about calling him for the last time in a very long time. Then Micah moved against her collarbone, and Jordan made a small sound, and she exhaled all the way down to the bottom of her lungs, and she let it go. She would not call him. She would not call anyone. She would do this alone, the same way she had always done every hard thing. By being more stubborn than the difficulty. By staying on her feet when her body told her to sit. By refusing to let the story end anywhere other than where she intended it to. The boys grew. They grew with the particular velocity of children who have been given all of one parent's love in the space where 2 parents' love would normally go. Micah was loud and physical and fearless. He learned to walk early, learned to run before walking was perfected, and broke 2 things in the apartment before his first birthday. Jordan was quiet and watchful and precise. He would spend 20 minutes examining a single shell on the beach with the focused intensity of a researcher, then look up and say something that made Amara feel like she was talking to someone much older than his age would suggest. They looked like her in some ways, the shape of their mouths, the warmth of their skin. But their eyes were Jite's, sharp, steady, the kind of eyes that noticed things other people missed. She thought, he would have loved them. The thought arrived sometimes without warning, and she had learned not to chase it, just let it pass through. She had built a life in Cascais that was quiet and functional and sufficiently invisible. She kept a post office box and a business email and had been careful since the first week never to appear in any photograph that could be shared online, never to use social media under her real name or her false one, never to give any address she wasn't prepared to abandon. She had looked up the Black Phoenix Syndicate twice in 5 years, not out of longing, or not only that, but out of the same vigilance she applied to everything. She needed to know where it was, the way you need to know where a weather system is even when you're not in its path. Jite had expanded. Of course he had. 3 countries, new sectors, a political reach that was extending into city governments in ways that the Korean press reported on with careful vagueness. He had become larger than he'd been when she knew him, which she hadn't thought possible. She told herself that was good, in a way. It meant his attention was occupied. It meant he was looking at bigger things than her. She was wrong about that. In the spring of the boy's 5th year, a man came to Cascais. Not Jite himself, one of Park's subordinates, a quiet man named Cho, who had been searching for 5 years with the methodical patience of someone who understood that this particular search would not end until it succeeded, and who had recently developed access to a facial recognition system that the Black Phoenix had acquired through a technology firm it now partially owned. The system ran continuously across publicly accessible camera networks, transport hubs, commercial districts, tourist areas. It was not targeted specifically at Amara. It was a general asset. But Park had loaded her profile into it in the first week of the search and left it running, the way you leave a trap in the woods and check it periodically. The trap triggered on a Wednesday in April. A camera at a ferry terminal in Cascais had captured a woman in a gray coat pushing a double stroller. The image was partial. Angle from above, her face turned slightly, but the system flagged it at 78% confidence. Park ran it through 3 secondary verification processes. The third one came back at 91. He called Jite. Jite was in a meeting with 3 of his senior lieutenants when the call came in. He stepped out. He listened to Park say, "We have a location, Portugal, coastal town. And sir, the images show 2 children, boys, maybe 4 or 5 years old." Jite didn't respond immediately. Park, who had worked for him for 11 years and understood the weight of different kinds of silence, waited. "Send me everything," Jite said. The file came through 40 minutes later. He was alone in his office by then. He opened it on his laptop. The images were grainy, surveillance quality, not photographic, but there was enough. There she was, older. Something in her posture had changed, not broken exactly, more like reinforced. She moved differently than the woman he'd known, with a careful economy that looked like someone who had learned through necessity to be aware of everything around her at all times. And beside the stroller, holding onto it with one hand, was a boy who had broken free slightly and was looking back the way they'd come. His face was clear in the frame. Jite stopped breathing for a moment. He recognized that face with the specific shock of someone recognizing themselves in an unexpected mirror. He pulled the second image. The stroller was side on. 2 boys, both bundled against the coastal wind, one leaning forward with his hands out toward something, one sitting back with that watchful stillness. 5 years old. The timing was, he did the math. He had done it before, once in the early months of the search, when he'd worked out that she would have known she was pregnant before she left, and had sat with that possibility for about 45 minutes before filing it away as too painful to hold consistently. Now the math was in front of him in a photograph, and it was irrefutable. He sat in his office at the top of Phoenix Tower for a long time. Below him, Seoul moved and breathed and did not know that the man who ran a significant portion of its criminal architecture was sitting very still, looking at 2 photographs of children he had never met, feeling something that had no place in the operational vocabulary he'd built his entire self around. He thought about all the years of the search, the money, the dead ends, the maps. He thought about Lisbon, the Moraria landlord, the cold trail. He thought about a kitchen at 7 a.m., and a woman looking up from her work and saying what, and him saying nothing, and the particular stupidity of that moment, of all the moments like it, of choosing the wrong thing so consistently that a person who loved him had decided that disappearing forever was preferable to staying. He thought about 2 little boys in a port town in Portugal who had his eyes. He pressed both hands flat on the desk. He called Park. "Book me on the next available flight to Lisbon," he said. "Private. Nothing that comes back to Phoenix. Sir, if I may, if we move too quickly. Park. Sir. Book the flight. But before Park could respond, a second notification came through on Jitai's secondary phone, the encrypted channel that monitored threat intelligence. His chief of security intelligence, a woman named Han Soo-yeon, had flagged something 20 minutes ago that he hadn't seen yet. He opened it. His blood went cold. The alert was simple. 3 words and a name. Yu Sung-wook, Portugal, Cascais. Jo Sung-wook was the second son of the Crimson Dragon Syndicate, the Black Phoenix's primary rival, a mid-tier Korean crime organization that had been maneuvering for the last 2 years to carve into Jitai's market share in Southeast Asia. They were not powerful enough to challenge him directly. They had been, instead, playing a longer game, gathering leverage, identifying pressure points, looking for handles they could use to move him without confronting him. Jitai stared at Ju's name. Then he looked at the images of his sons on the laptop screen. The Crimson Dragon had facial recognition too. They had operators in Europe too, and if they had found the same trail, he was already on his feet. Park, he said into the phone, get the plane ready in 2 hours, and get me Soo-yeon, now, because whoever was going to reach Amara first, whatever was about to descend on a small coastal town in Portugal, where a woman had spent 5 years building an invisible life, Jitai intended to be there before it did. The question was whether he was already too late. The plane lifted off from Incheon at 11:14 p.m. Jitai sat in the rear cabin alone. He'd sent his 2 best field operatives ahead on a commercial flight 6 hours earlier, a man named Baek and a woman named Lim, both of whom had done wet work in 3 countries and could move through a European coastal town without drawing attention. They were already on the ground in Cascais, watching, not approaching, just watching. He had been explicit about that. Do not approach her. Do not make contact. Observe and report. He stared at the window where Portugal would eventually appear and thought about Ju Sung-wook, 34 years old. Second son, which in Korean crime hierarchies meant ambitious and underestimated in equal measure, the worst possible combination. The Crimson Dragon operated differently than the Black Phoenix. They were hungrier, less disciplined, more willing to use crude leverage because they hadn't yet learned that crude leverage was a short-term tool with a long-term cost. They had been circling Jitai's operation for 2 years, probing for weaknesses, losing ground in Southeast Asia, and needing a dramatic move to reset the board. Amara and the twins were a dramatic move. He thought about that with a cold precision that was entirely incompatible with the other thing he was feeling, the thing that had no name, that had started when he'd looked at those surveillance photographs and seen a 5-year-old boy with his own face staring back at him. He hadn't slept, didn't try. He reviewed the intelligence files Han Soo-yeon had pulled on the Crimson Dragon's Portugal operation. Thin, incomplete, assembled from fragments, but enough to tell him that Ju had at least 4 people on the ground and had been in country for 72 hours. 72 hours ahead of them. He pressed 2 fingers against his temple. 72 hours was too long. Park's voice came through the cabin intercom. ETA 11 hours, sir. Baek reports no movement at the target address. She's inside. Children are inside. Nope. No visible external surveillance other than ours. Tell Beck to extend the perimeter. 1 block radius. Anyone who parks and doesn't move in 40 minutes, I want to know. Yes, sir. Silence. Jitai looked at the window again. Park. Sir. The boys. What time do they usually leave the house in the morning? A pause. Beck reports approximately 8:15. She walks them to a school 3 blocks from the apartment, returns alone, picks them up at 2:45. He said nothing more. He sat with the information about his son's daily schedule, the specific, ordinary information of a life that had been built without him, that had its own rhythms and routines and structures entirely independent of his existence, and felt something press against the inside of his chest that he recognized as the closest thing to remorse he had ever experienced. Not guilt, not exactly. Something heavier. He'd felt guilt before. Guilt was clean. It arrived, you filed it, you corrected course, or you didn't. This was different. This was the weight of years. Of every morning they'd woken up without him. Of whoever they were. Whoever these boys were. built entirely from what Amara had given them, because he hadn't been there to give anything. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep, but he stayed very still for the next 4 hours, which was the closest he could get. Amara was making breakfast when the feeling hit her. It was 7:48 a.m. She was standing at the stove in the kitchen of the apartment she'd rented for the past 3 years, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a pale yellow building 2 streets from the water, with a kitchen window that faced a small courtyard where the landlord's cat slept in the mornings. She'd made this apartment safe in every way she knew how. Secure locks, a neighbor she trusted on the floor below, no deliveries that required her name, no landline. The feeling was not specific. It was the feeling of being observed. She'd developed it over 5 years of living carefully, the same way a person who's been in a car accident develops a sensitivity to sudden sounds. It wasn't always right, but it was right more often than not. She stood at the stove and did not move for a moment. Jordan was at the kitchen table behind her, doing something precise and quiet with a set of colored pencils. Micah was still in the bedroom, going through the same 5-minute negotiation with his shoes that he conducted every morning, as though the concept of lacing were a philosophical dispute requiring fresh argument. "Jordan," she said, keeping her voice level, "go tell your brother to hurry up." Jordan looked at her. He had that way. That particular way of looking at her, where she could see him reading her face the way she'd always wished people couldn't. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine. Go." He went. She crossed to the kitchen window and looked down into the courtyard. The cats were there. A woman across the way was hanging laundry. Nothing wrong. Nothing unusual. And yet, she moved to the living room and checked the street through the gap in the curtain. The method she'd been using for years, the one that let her see out without being visible from outside. The street was ordinary. A man walking a dog. A woman with a grocery bag. 2 men at the corner she didn't recognize, but that alone meant nothing. This was a tourist town. There were always people she didn't recognize. One of the men had his hands in his pockets. He was looking at his phone. He hadn't moved in the time she'd been watching. She let the curtain fall. "Micah," she called. "Shoes? Now. We're leaving." She walked them to school the same way she always did. 3 blocks, left on Rua do Farol, right on the smaller street, through the gate, quick kiss on each forehead, while Micah complained about the kiss being unnecessary, and Jordan leaned into it like he always did. She watched them go through the doors. She stood on the pavement outside the school for an extra 30 seconds, looking at the street in both directions. Nothing. No one. She walked back. She was on the second block, passing a cafe where she sometimes got coffee, when a woman fell into step beside her. Not aggressive, not hurried, just there suddenly, matching her pace. "Amara Ward," the woman said. Amara's whole body went rigid. She kept walking. "You have the wrong person. Amara Brooks. Nay Brooks. Currently Ward. Graduate translation work, Seoul National University. 3 years. 1 flight, Seoul to Istanbul, Istanbul to Lisbon, October 5 years ago." The woman was speaking quietly, conversationally, the way you'd give someone directions. "I work for Kong Ji Tai." Amara stopped. She turned and looked at the woman fully for the first time. Late 30s, short hair, a stillness in her posture that Amara recognized as professional. Not military exactly, but the kind of composure that comes from training. She was wearing a gray jacket and her hands were visible, which was either deliberate reassurance or a trap. And either way, Amara was calculating the distance to the school, to the apartment, to 3 other locations she had mentally mapped as exit points. "My name is Lim," the woman said. "I'm not here to harm you or your children. I'm here because my employer is 11 hours behind me, and there are 4 people in this town who do not work for him and do not have his instructions regarding your safety." The street was not empty. A couple passed. A man on a bicycle. Amara said, "Where is he?" "In the air. He lands at Lisbon Airport at noon. There will be ground transport to Cascais. He asked me to make contact first to—" "He asked you," Amara said. Her voice had gone flat and quiet in the way that was more dangerous than volume. "He asked you to what, exactly? Warn me he's coming? What am I supposed to do with that?" "He wanted you to know you had a choice. I always had a choice. I made it 5 years ago." She started walking again. Tell him to turn the plane around. Lim kept pace. The other people in this town don't care about your choices, Ms. Brooks. They care about leverage. Amara's jaw tightened. She said nothing. The Crimson Dragon Syndicate has had 2 operatives watching your apartment since yesterday evening. We identified a 3rd this morning near your children's school. Lim said it without emphasis, without theater, just information delivered at the appropriate speed. They are not here to negotiate. Amara walked another half-block in silence. Her hands, which she'd kept very still at her side since the woman appeared, had started to shake, and she pressed them against her thighs as she walked so the woman wouldn't see it. "How did he find me?" she said. It wasn't a question about Jitai. It was a question about the other ones. Facial recognition. Same system Jitai uses, different database. The technology is commercially available if you have money. I was careful. You were very careful. You were also in one place for 3 years, which is a long time. Lim said it without cruelty, but without softening it either. I'm sorry. Amara stopped at the corner. She looked at the street. She looked at the building where her apartment was, the pale yellow one, the second-floor window where she'd stood an hour ago looking out at a courtyard with cats. She thought about what she had built in this building, in this town, and what it was worth against what Lim had just told her. She thought about Micah and Jordan, 3 blocks away, drawing and running and negotiating about shoes. "What does he want?" she said. Her voice was controlled. Barely. "To see them. No." Came out immediate and hard. "What does he want?" The whole answer, not the clean version. Lim was quiet for a moment, then, "He wants to protect you. I think he also wants to repair something that he understands is probably beyond repair. But the immediate want, the reason he's on that plane, is you and the boys are in danger, and he considers that his responsibility." His responsibility. The phrase tasted wrong in her mouth. Yes. He lost the right to claim responsibility 5 years ago. "I know," Lim said. "He knows it too. He's coming anyway." What? Jite landed at Lisbon at 12:08 p.m. Park was already in the car when he came through the private terminal. No words of greeting, no preamble. Park pulled up the operational map on the tablet and held it where Jite could see it while they moved. Lim made contact at 9:40. Ms. Brooks refused to meet with you directly but has not left the apartment. She retrieved the children from school at... Park checked the time. 11 minutes ago, earlier than usual. She's scared. She's preparing to run. Jite looked at the tablet. 4 red markers. Crimson Dragon positions. 1 near the school, 1 on the road she walked to the apartment, 1 at the northern access road out of the neighborhood, 1 that had been mobile since morning and was currently parked 3 streets from her building. "They're boxing her in," he said. "They're patient. No aggressive movement yet. I believe they're waiting for nightfall." The car was moving fast through the Lisbon outskirts, heading west on the coastal road. He could see the Atlantic through the car window, gray-green today, the way it got in spring when the wind was from the north. "The boys," he said. "Bayek has visual on the apartment. Both children are inside." He nodded, said nothing for a long moment. "She's going to run," he said. "Tonight, if she can. Earlier if she feels the net tightening." "Should I have Lim advise her to stay?" "No." He said it immediately. "We don't restrict her movement. We never restrict her movement. Is that understood?" Park glanced at him. "Understood, sir. We position ourselves between her and the Crimson Dragon. If she runs, we run with her. If she stays, we hold the perimeter." He handed the tablet back. "But we do not touch her exit routes. Not one." Park nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing away information about a man they thought they understood who was turning out to be more complicated than that. The car covered the next 20 kilometers in silence. Amara packed with the speed of someone who had practiced it, which she had. Not out of paranoia, or not only out of paranoia, but because she'd told herself in the first months of living here that she would never become so comfortable that she forgot the possibility. The bag under the bed had been there for 2 years. Documents, cash in 3 currencies, hard drive, a second phone registered to a different name, the photo of her mother. Clothes for the boys, she'd updated those as they grew, switching out the sizes each season with the same quiet dread of someone maintaining emergency equipment they hoped never to need. She set the bag on the bed. She stood at the bedroom window and looked at the street below. Micah appeared in the doorway behind her. He was wearing his school shirt untucked, the way he always was by afternoon, and his expression had that particular sharpness that meant he'd absorbed more of the atmosphere than she'd intended. "Are we leaving?" he said. She turned from the window. "Why would you ask that?" "You're doing the face." "What face?" "The one where you're looking at stuff but not seeing it." He crossed his arms, and he was so much like Jite in that moment, the posture, the direct assessment, that she had to physically redirect her gaze. "We left Lisbon like that. You had the same face for 3 days before we packed." She said, "I'm thinking about something. It's fine." "Is it the man?" Her heart stopped. "What man?" "Jordan saw him yesterday outside the school, said he was looking at us." Micah's face was entirely too steady for a 5-year-old. "Jordan said he had sad eyes." Amara crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched in front of him. "Did you talk to anyone? Did anyone talk to you?" "No," firmly. "We're not supposed to." "Right." She put both hands on his shoulders. "Okay, we're going to take a little trip. We're going to go see the ocean from a different place for a while. Sound good?" He looked at her with Jite's eyes and said, "Mom, you're scared." She held his gaze for one long second. "I'm careful," she said. "There's a difference. Now go get your brother." Jite was 4 kilometers from the apartment when Beck's voice came through the earpiece. "Movement on position 3, the mobile unit. They're on foot now, moving toward the target building." He sat forward. "How many?" 2 confirmed, possibly a third behind. "What's the ETA on foot to her building?" Park was already calculating. 8 minutes. We're 6 out. 6 minutes. 2 men on foot, 8 minutes from Amara's door. He was 6 minutes from the building by car. "Tell Lim to go now," he said. "Get to the building. Don't make contact with the Crimson Dragon, but get to Amara first." "Sir?" "If Lim moves visibly, tell her to move." Park relayed it. Jite looked out the car window at the coastal road. The pale buildings, the flash of the ocean between the rooftops, the ordinary light of an afternoon in a town that had nothing to do with any of this. He thought, 5 years ago, I sat in my office and looked at a map of Portugal and found nothing. 5 years ago, she was here, in this town, in a pale yellow building, and she was alone and she was pregnant with my sons, and I didn't know any of it. He thought about what he was going to say to her. He had been thinking about it for 11 hours on the plane, and he still didn't have the words, which was new for him. He was a man who had words for everything, who used language as one of several instruments of power. But every sentence he rehearsed arrived at the same dead end, the place where her face appeared in his mind, and he understood that no sentence could span what he had done. The car took the final turn onto her street. He saw Lim immediately, moving fast on the pavement, 30 meters ahead. He saw the pale yellow building, the second-floor window, the courtyard gate. He saw, emerging from the side street to the left, 2 men he didn't recognize walking with the particular deliberate casualness of people with intent. He said, "Stop the car." He was out of it before it fully stopped. He moved fast, not running, because running draws eyes, but the fastest walk a man can manage before it becomes something else. Park was behind him, the earpiece alive with Beck coordinating from a street away. Lim reached the building entrance first. The 2 men from the left were now 20 meters from the same entrance and accelerating slightly. Jite closed the gap. He was 10 meters from the door when it opened from the inside. Amara stepped out. She had a bag over one shoulder and 2 boys at her sides. Micah's hand in her right, Jordan's in her left. And she was moving with the focused efficiency of someone following a plan. Her eyes went immediately to the street, left, right, the systematic threat assessment of someone who had learned to read exits. She saw Lim first. Then she looked past Lim and her eyes found Jite, standing on the pavement of a coastal Portuguese town in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and she went completely still. 5 years collapsed into a single second. He looked exactly like the man she had walked away from, and nothing like him at all. Older in the jaw and eyes. Something in the set of his shoulders that had been hard before and was harder now. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him. No control in it, no calculation, nothing managed or performed. And then his eyes dropped. To the boys. Micah was looking at him with that unsettling, unblinking assessment. Jordan had stepped slightly behind his mother, one hand still holding hers, and was watching the man on the pavement with those wide, dark eyes. Jitai's face, the face she had memorized and tried to forget and memorized again without meaning to, did something she had never seen it do. It broke open. Just for a second, just long enough to be real. Then Micah said, loud and without any particular filter, "Mom, who is that?" And Amara's mouth had gone dry and her chest had gone tight, and she was still holding both of her son's hands and looking at the man who had destroyed her world. And behind him she had now seen the two men from the side street, and she understood with the cold, clarifying clarity of total emergency that the danger Lim had described was no longer theoretical. She looked at Jitai. He looked at her. "Amara." His voice was low, just her name, nothing attached to it. She said, "Don't." And then, "There are men behind you." He didn't turn. "I know." "Then why are you just—" "Because I need to look at you first." His voice was unsteady in a way she had never heard it. "I need 1 second. Before any of this. I need—" Ji-tae. She said his name for the first time in 5 years and felt it in her throat like something physical. "There are men 30 feet behind you who I believe are here for my children." That landed. The broken open expression closed. Not all the way back to what she remembered, but enough. The operational mind coming back online. The calculation resuming. He turned. The two men had stopped at the edge of the pavement. They'd seen Lim. They'd seen Park. They were recalculating. Jitae looked at them for exactly 3 seconds with the expression Amara had once seen him use in a room full of men who all believed they were dangerous. The expression that communicated without volume or gesture that the hierarchy of who was most dangerous in this situation had just been settled. The two men looked at each other. Then they looked back at Jitai. Then they turned and walked back the way they'd come, unhurried, controlled. The retreat of people who were recalibrating rather than withdrawing. And Jitai watched them go with the stillness of someone who understood that this was not over, not even close, just paused. He turned back to Amara. She hadn't moved. Both boys were still at her sides, Micah watching the retreating men with open curiosity, Jordan watching Jitai with that unreadable stillness that did something to Jitai's chest he didn't have the architecture to process right now. "We need to get off the street," Jitai said. "Don't tell me what we need." "Amara," I said, "don't." Her voice was low and precise and shaking at the edges in a way she clearly hated. "You don't get to show up here and start giving instructions. You don't get to—" She stopped, looked down at the boys, looked back up at him. "Not in front of them." He nodded. "Lim." He didn't look away from Amara. "Get us inside." The apartment was small and exactly what he would have expected from her. Functional, spare, nothing wasted. A bookshelf against one wall with the kind of organized chaos that came from being genuinely used rather than arranged for appearance. 2 pairs of small shoes near the door, one set tied neatly, one set not tied at all, which he could have identified without being told which belonged to which boy. Lim took up a position near the window. Park stayed outside with Bake. Amara set the bag she'd been carrying on the table. She did not sit. She stood in the center of her own kitchen with her arms crossed and looked at Jitai with an expression that he recognized as the surface layer of something much larger. Not anger exactly, or not only anger, but the specific exhaustion of someone who has been braced for an impact for 5 years and is now dealing with the fact that it has finally arrived. Micah and Jordan had retreated to the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Not fully out of sight, just enough removed to have plausible deniability while still watching everything. Jitai looked at them once, then back at Amara. "You knew," she said. "How long?" "I got the photographs 4 days ago." "And before that?" "I searched for 5 years." Something moved across her face. 5 years. Every transit hub, every country you could have reached from Istanbul. I had people in Lisbon. I had people in 6 other cities. He said it without pride, without justification, just the fact of it. "You were very careful." "Not careful enough." "No." She looked at him for a moment. "The people outside, the ones who aren't yours." Crimson Dragon, a rival organization, They identified you through the same facial recognition network. The technology is Yaetat. I know what facial recognition is. Flat. Why do they want us? Leverage. Against me. He held her gaze. They found you because I found you. Because the same search that located you also generated data trails that they were monitoring. My operation to find you made you findable to them. The silence in the kitchen was dense. He watched her absorb it, watched her work through the implication, which was that his 5 years of searching, the thing he'd done out of whatever combination of guilt and love and desperation had driven it, had also put her in danger, had brought this to her door. Her jaw tightened. Get out. Amara, get out of my apartment. Her voice didn't rise. That was worse. You came here, you told me that your search, your operation, your obsessive 5-year, that it led them here. To my children. And you want me to what? Stand here and have a conversation with you? I want you to let me fix it. You broke it. She uncrossed her arms and then crossed them again, the gesture of someone who doesn't know what to do with their hands when they're this angry. You broke everything, first in Seoul and now here. You don't fix things, Jitae. You just leave wreckage and then make it worse trying to clean it up. From the hallway, Micah's voice. Mom. She turned. Both boys were standing at the hallway entrance now, fully visible. Jordan had his hand on his brother's arm in the way that Jitae would later understand meant Jordan was trying to slow Micah down from saying something that didn't need to be said. But Micah was not a boy who could be slowed. He looked directly at Jitae. Are you our dad? He said. The kitchen went absolutely silent. Jitae felt the question move through him the way a physical impact moves. Not the pain of it arriving, but the rearrangement of everything after. He looked at this boy, this loud, clear-eyed, fearless boy, and could not find a single word in any language he spoke. Amara said, Micah, because you look like us, Micah said. He said it the way children state observations, without cruelty, without diplomacy, just the raw fact of what he saw. Jordan said so yesterday, when we saw you at the school. He said, that man has our eyes. Jordan said nothing. He was looking at Jitae with the expression of someone who had already made a determination and was now simply waiting to see if events would confirm it. Jitae looked at Amara. She was looking at the floor. Something in her posture had collapsed slightly. Not broken, but the effort of holding it all together was visible now in the set of her shoulders, in the way her hands had dropped to her sides. He looked back at Micah. Yes, he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. I am. Micah processed this for approximately 3 seconds. Then, why weren't you here before? Jitae opened his mouth. Amara said, that is enough for right now. She said it firmly but not harshly, the voice of someone managing a situation that has exceeded its container. Go to your room, both of you. I'll explain later. Jordan took his brother's arm, and this time Micah went, though he looked back at Jitae once more over his shoulder with those sharp, assessing eyes before disappearing around the corner. The kitchen was quiet again. Amara pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. She stood like that for a moment, not looking at him. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at the screen. Her face changed. Jitae watched the change happen, watched something that looked like confusion replace the anger, replace the exhaustion, before resolving into something colder and more frightened than either. She turned the phone so he could see it. The text was from an unknown number. 4 words and a name. We have Vanessa Brooks. Jitae took the phone from her hand without asking. He read the message twice. Then he looked at Amara, who was standing very still with both arms at her sides and an expression on her face that he couldn't fully read, not because she was hiding it, but because what was in it was too layered to parse quickly. Fear, yes, but something else beneath the fear, something complicated, something that had to do with the particular cruelty of being asked to care about someone who had detonated your life. When did your sister come to Portugal? He said. She didn't. Amara's voice was careful. She doesn't know where I am. She's here. That's not... She stopped, took a breath. Vanessa doesn't know where I live. I haven't spoken to her since Seoul, since the bedroom door, since the smile. She didn't say any of that. She doesn't know. Jite was already composing texts on his own phone. To Beck, expand sweep. Second target may be in the area. Vanessa Brooks, female, early 30s, American national. Find her. To Park, Crimson Dragon may have a second leverage asset. Adjust. To Han Su-yan, his intelligence chief in Seoul. How did CD know about Vanessa Brooks? Pull their surveillance logs. Now. He looked up from the phone. Amara was watching him work with an expression that sat somewhere between exhausted and furious, and something else he couldn't name. She came to find you, he said. Not a question. I told you she doesn't know. She found you. He said it quietly. The same way I found you, the same way the Crimson Dragon found you. The world is smaller than it used to be, Amara. If she's here, she made an effort to be here. She tracked you down. He paused. How long has she been trying to contact you? The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. She's been calling my mother, Amar said finally. My mother told me. I asked her not to give Vanessa any information, and she said she wouldn't, but, she exhaled. My mother and Vanessa have always been close. Yes. Jitai felt something slot into place in the operational picture. A cold, clean slot. Your mother gave her the information to find you. Amara closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. My mother wouldn't know she was putting us in danger. She wouldn't understand how. I know. He said it quickly because he could see what it was costing her. I'm not. He stopped. Recalibrated. He was not in a position to be reassuring to her. He had not earned that position. The question is whether Vanessa was followed here, or whether the Crimson Dragon found her independently and is using her as a secondary asset. Does it matter? It matters for what we do in the next 4 hours. His phone buzzed. He read it. He looked at Amara. Park has Vanessa's location, he said. She's in a car, moving, not of her own volition. Amara's face went white. They have her. Yes. She didn't. Amara's voice cracked slightly and she shut it down immediately, compressed it back, the way she did everything painful, by force of will and the refusal to let it show any longer than it had to. She didn't know what she was walking into. Whatever she did, she didn't know. I know. Don't say I know like you understand. You don't get to... Amara. He stepped toward her and then stopped, because the look on her face told him to stop, and he stopped. I need to tell you something. She looked at him. The text wasn't to you, he said. Your number. The one this came to. It's your secondary phone. The registered one. How would the Crimson Dragon have that number? She stared at him. Lim gave me this number after she made contact this morning. She said it was a secure... The sentence ended. They both arrived at the same place at the same time, the specific cold terminus of a thought that neither of them wanted to complete. Jitai turned slowly toward the window where Lim was standing. Lim was already looking at him, not with surprise, not with guilt, with the particular flat readiness of someone who has been waiting for a moment and has now arrived at it. Jitai said very quietly, How long? Lim said nothing. How long have you been feeding them information? Lim's hand moved toward her jacket. Jitai crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and had her wrist before the hand completed its movement. Not violent, precisely controlled, the grip of a man who had spent his entire adult life learning to be the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He held her wrist and looked at her face from a foot away and waited. Lim exhaled slowly. The readiness in her face resolved into something that was almost like resignation. 18 months, she said. The number landed in the kitchen like a physical weight. 18 months. Jitai ran the calculation without wanting to. 18 months meant Lim had been inside the Black Phoenix, feeding information to the Crimson Dragon while helping to run the operation that located Amara, which meant every piece of intelligence gathered in that 18 months had been accessible to both sides simultaneously, which meant the Crimson Dragon had not been monitoring Jitai's search trails from the outside. They had been inside the search itself. They had known about Amara before Jitai reached Portugal. They had known about the boys. They had been ahead of him this entire time and had let him lead them directly to her door because it was easier than finding her themselves. He felt the floor shift beneath his understanding of the past 4 days. "The text to her phone," he said. "I gave them the number this morning after I made contact. They wanted confirmation of her identity before they moved on the sister." "Vanessa Brooks." "Yes." "You told them about Vanessa." "They already knew. Your intelligence files. 18 months of files, Jite." She said his name without his title, which was its own kind of statement. "They know everything you know." He released her wrist. He stepped back. He stood in the center of Amar's kitchen, the kitchen of the woman he had spent 5 years searching for, in the apartment where his sons had grown up without him, in a town he'd only reached because a traitor in his organization had been guiding his hand, and felt the full weight of the disaster assembled around him. Amara was against this counter she'd been watching. Her face was doing something he couldn't fully read. Not shock exactly. She'd absorbed the revelation with the speed of someone who'd been living in threat mode long enough that new threats arrived without the luxury of processing time. What was in her face was something worse than shock. It was the look of a woman having her worst assessment of the situation confirmed. "You brought this here," she said. "Yes. Your organization, your search, your—" She pressed her lips together. 5 years, Jitai. 5 years I kept us safe. 5 years I was so careful, and then your people— I know. Stop saying that. She pushed off the counter. "What does knowing do? What does it fix? There are people with my sister in a car, and people on the street outside my building, and my children are in the next room, and you're standing in my kitchen telling me that the woman you sent to protect us was working against us this whole—" Her voice fractured. She caught it, held it. "What is your actual plan?" He looked at her. In the next room, Jordan's voice, quiet and precise, was explaining something to Micah in a low tone. Jite could hear the cadence of it without the words, the sound of his son's voice doing something ordinary, explaining, reasoning, in the middle of all of this. He said, "I need to call Seoul. I need to—" His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it. The voice on the other end was Korean, male, unhurried. The voice of someone who had been waiting to make this call for a while and was enjoying the occasion. "Mr. Kang." A pause, with the theater of someone who wanted the pause to register. "I believe you've recently discovered that your operation was somewhat more transparent than you'd hoped." Jite said nothing. "My name is Ju Sung-wook. I think you know who I am." "I know who you are." "Then I'll skip the introduction." Ju's voice was almost pleasant. Almost. "You have something I want, or rather, you're standing near something I want. 2 somethings, actually. A beat. The woman you came to find, and the children." Jite's free hand had closed into a fist at his side. He was aware of Amara watching him, reading his face, trying to decode the call from the half she could hear. "What do you want?" Jite said. "I want you to step back," Ju said. "Withdraw your people from Cascades, get on your plane and go back to Seoul. Leave the woman and the children in place, and in 48 hours, after we've had an opportunity to establish certain agreements with them, they'll be released unharmed." "Agreements," Jite said. "Leverage, if you prefer the honest word. You've made yourself very difficult to reach through conventional means, Mr. Kang. You've insulated yourself beautifully, but a man will move for his children. A man will make concessions he'd never make for territory or money or reputation, when the other option is—" Ju let the sentence end itself. Jite looked at Amara. She had heard enough of the cadence to understand what kind of call this was. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were steady. The fear was still there. He could see it in the tension at the corners of her mouth, but it had been organized into something functional, the way she organized everything. "And Vanessa Brooks," Jite said into the phone. A small pause, surprised or performing surprise. "Insurance, she'll be returned when you comply." She has everything to do with it. She walked into this town looking for her sister, which makes her useful. I don't pick the tools, Mr. Kang. I use the ones that are available." A pause. "You have 2 hours to withdraw your people. After that, we stop being patient." The call ended. Jite stood holding the phone for a moment. Then he set it on the counter. Amara said, "Tell me." He told her. All of it, fast, without softening. The demand, the withdrawal request. Vanessa as insurance, the 2-hour window. She listened with her arms at her sides and her face controlled and her breathing steady in the deliberate way of someone managing their own physiology by force of will. When he finished, she said, "You're not going to withdraw?" "No." "Then what? I'm going to end it." He said it the way he said operational decisions, without drama, just the fact of the conclusion. Not manage it, not negotiate, end it, tonight. She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen felt very small. Outside, the afternoon light was dimming toward evening, the coastal gold going gray. "And Vanessa," she said. He heard the weight in the question, the complexity of it, the fact that she was asking about a woman who had done what she'd done, who she had every right to have written off entirely, who she was asking about anyway, because that was who Amara was. "I'll get her out," he said. "That's not a plan." "No, I need 10 minutes to make it one." He held her gaze. "Can you give me 10 minutes? She looked at him with 5 years of everything between them in her face, the love that had been there, the betrayal that had replaced it, the 5 years of silence and survival, and the 2 boys in the next room who had his eyes and her spine. She looked at him with all of that and said nothing for long enough that he thought she might say no. Then, 10 minutes. He was already on the phone to Sol when the window behind Lim, who was zip-tied to a kitchen chair, a fact that Amara had not protested, exploded inward with the sound of something that was not random, not accidental, but precisely, intentionally directed. The room filled with a chemical fog before anyone could move, and the last thing Jite clearly registered before his eyes began to fail was Amara's voice from somewhere very close, saying his name. Not angry this time, not careful, just his name. The way you say a name when you need when you have nothing else left to say. The fog was fast. Jite had been in situations where chemical agents were deployed. He knew the specific quality of the disorientation, the way your vision went first at the edges, soft and wrong, before the center followed. He dropped to one knee automatically, below the main dispersal line, and pulled his jacket over his mouth. 3 seconds. He had maybe 3 seconds of functional clarity before the compound did its work. He used them. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and hit the hallway door hard with his shoulder, pushing through into the corridor where the boys were. The fog was thinner here. The window had been the single entry point and the kitchen bore the concentration. Micah was on his feet already, back against the wall, eyes streaming. Jordan was beside him, one hand pressed to the floor like he was feeling for vibration. Jite grabbed both of them by the backs of their shirts and moved, not to the front door. The front was the point they'd expect. He moved to the bedroom at the end of the hall, the one with the window that faced the courtyard. He'd clocked it when he first came in, the way he clocked every secondary exit in every space he entered, 20 years of operational habit that had never felt more useful than right now. He shoved the window open. Courtyard below. 8 feet, maybe 9. Concrete, but there was a section of wooden lattice against the opposite wall, and the landlord's potted plants clustered beneath this window specifically. Micah looked at him. Looked at the window. "You're going to drop me?" Micah said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Okay." No hesitation. This kid. Jite lowered him by the wrists and dropped him at 4 feet. Micah hit, stumbled, stood. Jite looked at Jordan. Jordan was looking back down the hallway toward the kitchen, toward his mother. "She's coming," Jite said. He didn't know if it was true. He was going to make it true. "Go." He lowered Jordan, dropped him. Then he went back down the hallway. The kitchen was thick with the agent now. His eyes were burning, his vision narrowing at the margins. He could see 2 shapes moving in the smoke that had come through the window with the canister. Men coming through, one already inside and one still on the sill. Amara was on the floor near the counter. Not unconscious, he could see her moving, trying to get low, one hand over her mouth. He didn't think. He picked up the kitchen chair, limb still zip-tied to it, and threw it at the man coming off the windowsill. The impact was sufficient. The man went back out the window with the chair. The first man inside had recovered his footing and was moving toward Amara. Jite hit him from behind with enough force to put him into the counter. The man was trained. He took it and turned, and they went into each other in the tight space of the kitchen. No room for anything elegant, just close, ugly work. Jite took an elbow to the jaw that sent white across his vision. He put the man's head into the cabinet door twice, felt the second impact end the resistance, and caught him going down. His vision was narrowing fast now. The compound was in his lungs. He grabbed Amara's arm. Up! Now! She was already trying to stand. He pulled her the rest of the way. She was coughing hard, the kind of cough that doubles you over, but she was on her feet and she was moving, and she kept moving. Bedroom. Window. He went out first and she came after, and he caught her coming down, both of them hitting the courtyard stones harder than was comfortable, her elbow catching him in the chest on the way down. They stood up. Micah and Jordan were against the courtyard wall. Both of them looked at Jitai with identical expressions, his own eyes in their faces, reading the situation with a speed that was entirely his and entirely theirs at the same time. Amara looked at her sons. Something passed over her face that was too fast and too private to read. Then she grabbed Jordan's hand and Jitai grabbed Micah's, and they moved. Park had the car on the side street 60 meters from the courtyard gate. They reached it in under 2 minutes. Jitai got everyone in and said one word to Park. Move. The car moved. Park drove without asking where. He knew the operational priority. Distance first, then regroup. He took the coastal road north, away from the town center, putting kilometers between them and the apartment while Jitai sat in the back seat with his eyes streaming and his jaw already swelling and tried to think. Amara was between the boys. Jordan had his head against her shoulder. Micah was watching Jitai with the unsettling focus of a child who had decided that everything happening was important information to be cataloged. Jitai called Bayek. Location. 3 blocks from the apartment. We heard the window. 2 CD operatives neutralized at the scene. We moved in when the canister went. Limb is secured. A pause. She's talking. She's been talking since we cut her loose from the chair. What is she saying? The real target was never the apartment. The apartment was diversion. They wanted you on the street and moving. Another pause, heavier this time. The boys, sir. Their primary objective is the boys. The woman is secondary leverage. They have a vehicle staged at the northern marina. Boat access. They were going to take the children by water. Jitai looked at Micah, then at Jordan. He said, What about Vanessa Brooks? Still in the vehicle last reported, east side of the town, near the Boca do Inferno overlook. 4 operatives with her. He ended the call. Amara was looking at him. She'd heard enough. Her face was doing that thing again. The controlled surface over something enormous and volatile underneath. They wanted the boys, she said. Yes. To get to you. Yes. She looked out the window at the darkening coastal road, the Atlantic on the left, black now with the evening gone, the white line of surf visible, but nothing else. Then she said, Where are we going? He said, Somewhere I can make calls and plan. There's a property 20 kilometers north, one of my company's European holdings. It's clean. No one connected to Phoenix has been there in 2 years. Clean, she said. The word had an edge to it. Secure. I chose the word wrong. She said nothing. From the far seat, Micah said, Is Mom in danger? Jitai looked at him. The boy was asking him directly, not his mother, him. Like he'd decided in the course of the last 40 minutes that Jitai was the relevant party for this category of question. He said, I'm going to make sure she isn't. Micah considered this with his head tilted, which was exactly what Jitai did when he was deciding whether a statement was sufficient. That's not a yes or no, Micah said. No, Jitai said. It's not, but it's true. Micah looked at his mother. She gave him a small nod. He seemed to accept the totality of that exchange as enough and sat back. The property was a converted stone house set back from the cliff road, surrounded by maritime pines. Park got them inside, and Jitai did a walkthrough of every room in under 3 minutes, while Amara settled the boys in a back bedroom that had no exterior windows and a solid interior door. She came back out into the main room and found Jitai at the table with his phone and a map he'd pulled from the car's emergency kit. His jacket was off. There was blood on his shirt collar from where the elbow had caught his jaw, and the swelling on his left cheek was visible now in the proper light. She looked at it. She didn't say anything about it. She sat across the table from him. Tell me the full plan, she said. He told her. Beck and two operatives from a Phoenix asset team he'd had standing by in Lisbon, called in 2 hours ago when the threat picture escalated, were converging on the Boca do Inferno location to extract Vanessa. Simultaneously, Park would take Jitai to where Ju Sung-wook was staging his command position. Lim had given up the location, which was a rented house on the south edge of Cascais, with 4 operatives inside and Ju himself coordinating. "You're going to Ju," she said. "Yes." "With Park." "And 2 others." She looked at the map, looked at the position he'd marked, looked back at him. "4 operatives and Ju. You're going in with 3 people." "3 is enough." That's an extraordinarily confident statement for someone who currently has a swollen jaw and chemical burns in his eyes. He almost smiled. Almost. "I've done more with less. That's not reassuring." She pulled the map slightly toward her, looking at the layout. Old habit. She'd always been better at spatial reasoning than she'd ever given herself credit for, and he'd noticed it early. She identified the angles without being told how to read them. "There's a secondary road here. If his people try to withdraw, Park covers it. And the water access? Beck has the marina locked. No boats leaving." She pushed the map back. She looked at him across the table, and he looked at her across 5 years and a kitchen table in Portugal, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "Why did you really keep searching? For 5 years? You have the kind of resources that could have found me in 12 months if you'd committed fully. I know that. You know I know that." He was quiet. "So why did it take 5 years?" she said. "What were you actually doing for the first 2 or 3? He exhaled, set his phone down. "I found the Istanbul connection in the 4th month. I knew you'd gone to Portugal within the first year." He paused. "I didn't push the Portugal search until 18 months ago." She stared at him. "Why?" He looked at the table. The specific way he looked at it, the flat, directed gaze of someone who is making themselves hold still and say the honest thing rather than the manageable thing, was something she hadn't seen on him before. Jitai was not a man who had ever struggled to maintain his surface. "Because I was afraid," he said, "of what you would say, of what you would be." He looked up. "Of who you would be without me. Whether you'd built something that was better without me in it. Whether showing up would only—" He stopped. "I ran a crime organization for 15 years, Amara. I have made decisions that cost people everything. I have sat across from men with legitimate grievances and given them nothing. I have never once been afraid of a conversation." She waited. "I was afraid of that one," he said. The house was quiet except for the wind off the Atlantic pushing against the pine trees outside and the faint sound of Micah's voice in the back room, telling his brother something in the low, animated tone he used when he was making up a story. Amara looked at Jitai for a long time. Then she said, "Go get my sister." He stood. She stood. They were 3 feet apart in a stone house on a Portuguese cliff, with the ocean outside and their sons in the next room, and a war to finish. And she looked at him and said, "Whatever happens tonight, if you don't come back from it, I'll come back. If you don't—" She pushed past the interruption. "The boys need to know who they are. All of it. Everything. Don't protect them from it, Jitai. They're yours. They can handle the truth." He held her gaze, felt the weight of the instruction, the trust embedded in it, the qualification she was extending even here, even now. "I'll come back," he said again. Not defensively, just true. She stepped back, crossed her arms, nodded at the door. He went. The Crimson Dragon's command house was a rented villa on the southern residential edge of Cascais. Quiet street, high wall, 2-car garage that held their vehicles, exterior cameras on the gate and the corner. Lim had given them the camera rotation and the interior layout with the efficiency of someone burning every remaining bridge. Jite studied the exterior from the car parked on the service road parallel to the villa's garden wall. Park was driving. 2 operatives from the Lisbon team, men he'd used before, men who didn't need extensive instruction, were in the vehicle behind. His jaw ached. His eyes were still raw from the compound. He could feel his pulse in the swelling on his cheek. He thought about Ju Sung-wook's voice on the phone, the almost pleasant tone of a man who thought he'd maneuvered himself into the stronger position, the patience of someone who had spent 2 years building toward a moment. Jite had spent 15 years being the kind of man that other men built toward, made plans against, positioned themselves to use. He'd faced those moments before, the assembled leverage, the calculated pressure, the demand. He knew how they ended when he was on the receiving end. They ended the way he decided they ended. That had always been the only variable that mattered. "Camera rotation?" he said. Park glanced at his watch. 30 seconds on the gate camera, 15 on the corner. There's a 12-second overlap window if you come in at the garden side. Wall height, 2 meters, maybe 1.80 meters at the low section near the drainage run. Jite looked at the wall, looked at his team, looked at his watch. His phone buzzed. "Beck. We have Vanessa. She's shaken. Minor bruising. 2 CD operatives down. We're mobile." He texted back. "Keep her away from the town until I confirm clear." Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket and said to Park, "On my count." He was over the wall in the 12-second window, landed in the garden soft, and moved toward the villa's rear door with Park 2 steps behind him. The operatives from the Lisbon team came over the gate on a separate line on Park's signal, taking the garage side approach. The rear door was locked with a standard electronic keypad, the kind used in rental properties across Europe, a 4-digit code that management companies invariably set to something simple. Lim had given him the code. He punched it in. The light went green. He was inside. The kitchen was empty. The main hallway beyond it was lit. He could hear voices from the front room. Korean, 2 speakers, low and operational in register. He moved along the hallway wall with Park 1 meter back, both of them moving the way you move in a space when noise is the variable that matters most. The first operative came out of a side room and ran directly into Jitai. It was fast and close and ugly. The man was big, trained, and reacted with the speed of someone whose body knew what to do before his brain caught up. He got a hand on Jitai's collar. Jite drove the heel of his palm up under the man's jaw, felt the impact travel up his own arm, stepped into the man's collapsing weight, and redirected it into the wall. Park was there for the finish, 4 seconds, maybe 5. They moved. The front room was large, a rented space's attempt at a living area, functional furniture, a folding table set up as a command station with 2 laptops and a communication array. 2 men at the table, both turning at the sound from the hallway. The Lisbon team came through the front simultaneously, and it was over before the architecture of the confrontation could fully resolve itself. Jite stood in the center of the room. Ju Sung-wook was not there. He looked at the command table. He looked at the 2 laptops. He looked at the communication array, which was active, a channel open, transmitting. He looked at Park. Park moved to the array and read the transmission log in 3 seconds. He looked up. His expression said everything before he spoke. "He's not here, sir. He left 20 minutes ago." Park's voice was very controlled. "The marina. He went to the marina himself. He's not waiting for his people to bring the children to him." Jite's body went cold. He was already moving before Park finished the sentence. Back through the hallway, through the kitchen, over the garden wall, into the car. Park was on the radio to Beck before the doors were closed. "Ju is moving to the marina. Do you have eyes on—" Beck's response was immediate and wrong. "Marina access road is blocked. A truck, sideways across the road. We can't get the vehicle through. We're on foot, but it's 400 meters, and—" Jite took the radio. "How many men does he have?" "2 confirmed, maybe a third in the vehicle." "And the boat?" "Engine's running. It's been running for 20 minutes. They were ready to go whether or not they had the children. It's a pickup, not a—" Beck paused. "He's going to take whoever he can get. If the children aren't available, he takes the woman. Vanessa Brooks. We pulled her 2 kilometers east, but she knows about the marina. She's trying to—" Static. Then Beck's voice, sharp. "She ran. Vanessa Brooks got out of our vehicle and she's running toward the marina on foot. She heard Ju's name on the radio and she—" Jite looked at Park. Park was already driving, the car moving fast through the residential streets toward the coast. "Why would she run toward him?" Park said. It wasn't rhetorical. He genuinely didn't understand. Jite thought about Vanessa Brooks. He thought about the text. "We have Vanessa Brooks." He thought about Lim saying they already knew. 18 months of files. He thought about the smile Amara had described, the deliberate smile, the smile of someone who wanted to be seen. He thought about a woman who had flown to Portugal to find a sister who had spent 5 years hiding from the world, and the particular kind of person who would do that without being asked and without permission. He thought about what Lim had known, what 18 months of files contained, what Ju Sung-wook would know about the Brooks family that Ji-tae himself had never thought to look at. He said, very quietly, "How long has Vanessa been in Portugal?" Park checked his phone. Baek's first sighting of her was 4 days ago. 4 days? The same window as the Crimson Dragon's initial arrival. Ji-tae pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and thought about that for the 3 seconds he could afford to spend on it. Then, Park. When Lim gave CD the intelligence about Amara, about the boys, about the family, he kept his voice flat. Did she give them Vanessa's contact information? Park was driving. He didn't answer immediately. Park. The files would have included it. Standard family background on the primary target always includes, "How long would it take," Ji-tae said, "for an organization that wanted leverage over me, that had 18 months of files and unlimited budget, to identify a woman who had deep unresolved issues with her sister, who had already demonstrated she was willing to act destructively within that relationship?" He paused. How long to find her, approach her, offer her something? The car went over a speed bump and the coastal road opened up ahead of them, the marina lights visible now a kilometer out. Park said slowly, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Vanessa Brooks didn't accidentally find Cascais," Ji-tae said. "I'm saying the Crimson Dragon reached out to her before she came. I'm saying she wasn't abducted from this town. She came here already knowing they were here, and at some point in the last 4 days, the arrangement she thought she had with them changed without her consent into something she hadn't agreed to and couldn't get out of." The car hit the marina access road and the headlights swept across the blocked truck, a heavy rental, positioned with precision across the full width of the road, no way through. Park braked hard. Ji-tae was out of the door before the car finished stopping, moving along the road shoulder at a run, the Atlantic wind hitting him full in the face, salt and cold in the distant engine sound of a boat that was not yet gone. He could see the marina lights. He could see the dock. He could see 2 figures on the main pier moving fast toward a vessel at the far end. One was Ju Sung-wook. The build matched the photographs. The way he moved matched the profile of a man who was used to other people managing the physical work while he directed. The other figure was smaller, female, being moved rather than moving voluntarily, which told Ji-tae that whatever arrangement Vanessa had believed she had was now fully dissolved. He ran. Behind him, he could hear Park on the radio, hear Baek's team coming up from the east on foot, hear the operational pieces converging with the particular ragged urgency of a plan that had been overtaken by events and was now running on instinct and proximity. The pier was 200 meters of open dock. No cover. Ji-tae covered the first 100 at a sprint before Ju's remaining operative on the dock saw him and moved to intercept. The man was between Ji-tae and the boat, and he came forward with the confidence of someone who had handled this kind of situation before and expected to handle it the same way. Ji-tae didn't slow down. He hit the man at full speed and they went off the edge of the dock together, into the black water of the marina, and the cold was a physical shock. The Atlantic in spring, the kind of cold that doesn't ask permission, that takes the breath before the mind can prepare for it. They went under and Ji-tae oriented himself by the dock light above and came back up with the man's collar in his fist and drove the back of his head against the dock piling once, definitively, and let him go. He pulled himself back up onto the dock. Soaking, gasping, moving, Ju had reached the boat. He was pushing Vanessa ahead of him. She was fighting, which Ji-tae noted with something that was not admiration exactly, but was adjacent to it, clawing at his arm, trying to twist away, not succeeding, but not stopping either. Ju had a hand in her collar and a gun in his other hand, which changed the geometry of everything. Ji-tae stopped 10 meters from the boat. Joe looked at him. Whatever he'd expected Ji-tae to look like at the end of this evening, wet, bleeding from a cut above his ear where the dock had caught him going in, jaw swollen, eyes still red from the chemical agent. This was apparently it, because something shifted in his expression. Not fear. The recalibration of a man who had run the numbers and was running them again. "Mr. Kang," Ju said. He had Vanessa pulled against him, the gun at a position that was unambiguous. "You're more persistent than I expected." Ji-tae said nothing. He was breathing hard. He was looking at the gun and at Ju's hand on Vanessa and at the boat, which had one man visible in the wheelhouse and possibly one more below. Vanessa looked at Ji Tai. Her face was a wreck. She'd been crying or had been crying and had stopped, and the stopping looked like it had cost her something. There was bruising at her jaw. One eye was swollen at the corner. She looked at Ji Tai with an expression he hadn't expected and couldn't immediately name. Not relief, not quite, but the look of someone who has run out of bad options and is now looking at the least bad one and making their peace with it. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was raw. "About the kids. About what they were going to—" She stopped. "I thought they just wanted information. I thought—" "Vanessa." He said her name quietly. Not kindly, not unkindly, just stopping the sentence. "I know." Joe's jaw tightened, touching. "Step back, Mr. Kang. You have no play here. The woman is my exit, and my insurance, and you are standing on a dock with no weapon, and your people are 3 minutes away at best." He moved slightly, edging toward the boat. "Back up. Let me leave. Tomorrow we talk about what an accommodation between our organizations might look like. And everyone," Jite said, "your people in the house are in custody. Your marina approach is covered from the east. You have one man in the wheelhouse and no crew below. I can see the lighting pattern, and you're running light for a fast exit, not a long one, which means this boat goes maybe 40 kilometers before it needs to dock somewhere you'll be waiting." He said it without pausing, without emphasis, just information. "You have nowhere to go, Ju. You have a gun and a woman who has already decided she's not cooperating, which makes her not a hostage, which makes her a liability in your hand." Joe was still. He was thinking. Jite could see him thinking, could see the calculation running, and he pressed into the window before it closed. "Put the gun down," Jite said. "Walk away from the boat. I'll give you a 12-hour window to get out of Portugal before I make calls that will close every exit on the continent. That's the offer. It expires when my people reach this dock." He could hear Beck's team now, footsteps on the dock planking, coming fast from the east. 60 seconds. Maybe less. Ju looked at him. He looked at Vanessa, who was looking at the water with the particular expression of someone weighing options. He looked at the boat. He let go of Vanessa's collar. She moved immediately, 3 steps sideways, away from him, and she didn't run. She just moved out of the geometry and stopped, which was the right instinct, and Jite noted it. Joe set the gun on the dock. Slowly, deliberately, the gesture of a man who was choosing to lose this engagement and had already started thinking about the next one. He looked at Jite with an expression that was not quite respect and not quite hatred, but lived in the territory between them. "Your family is going to cost you," Ju said. "Everything you've built. Men who have something to protect always lose it." Jite looked at him. "Then I'll lose it." Bayek and 2 operatives hit the dock at a run. Ju went to his knees with his hands up before they reached him, the surrender of a professional who knew when an engagement was over and saw no benefit in additional injury. Jite stood on the dock. The wind came off the water, the boat's engine idled. The marina lights threw orange across the black surface of the Atlantic, and Jite stood soaking wet and bleeding slightly, and breathing through his mouth because his jaw made nasal breathing uncomfortable, and he looked at the water for a long moment. Then he looked at Vanessa. She was standing 5 meters away, her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the dock at her feet. She looked like someone who had arrived at the end of a very long series of bad decisions and was finally in a position to see the whole sequence clearly, which was a particular kind of terrible. She looked up, found his eyes. He said, "We need to go." She nodded, said nothing else. They went. The stone house on the cliff road at 2 a.m. was a different kind of quiet than it had been at dusk. Amara heard the car before she saw the headlights. She was at the main room window, had been at the window or near it for the past 2 hours, moving between it and the back bedroom where the boys had finally fallen asleep in the small hours, Micah on his back with his arms out like he'd fallen from a height, and Jordan curled on his side with both hands under his cheek. She'd sat between them on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to them breathe, doing the thing parents do that has no name, just being present, being the weight of a person in the room, being evidence that the world was still continuous and safe. She'd come back out to watch the window when she couldn't sit still any longer. The headlights came up the cliff road, one car, then a second. She watched them pull to the property and watched the doors open and watched Jitai get out of the first car. She took him in from the window before she went to the door. The state of him, wet clothes dried to damp, the swelling on his jaw worse in the outdoor light, a cut above his ear she hadn't seen before. The way he moved, still functional, still deliberate, but with the particular quality of someone running on decision rather than energy, the tank empty and the wheel driving anyway. She went to the door and opened it. He stopped on the threshold. He looked at her. She stepped back to let him in. He came in. Park remained outside. From the second car, she could see Beck helping a woman she recognized. The shape of her, the specific way she moved, the hair she'd always worn the same way since they were children, toward the property. Vanessa. Amara stood in the doorway of the stone house and watched her sister walk toward her across the gravel in the 2 a.m. dark with a swollen eye and her arms still wrapped around herself, and felt something so complicated move through her chest that she couldn't have said what it was with any accuracy. Not forgiveness, not yet, but not the absence of it either. Something that was prior to both, the raw recognition of a person she had known all her life, damaged and present and unable to hide behind anything at this particular moment. Vanessa stopped 5 feet away. She looked at Amara. Her face was doing nothing managed. Whatever capacity she had for performance had burned out somewhere on that dock, and what was left was just her face, just the fact of her, just 30 years of sisterhood and one catastrophic act and everything in the space between. She said, "I told myself it was your fault." Her voice was wrecked. For years. For 5 years I told myself you were the one that you'd taken things that should have been mine, that Jite would have... She stopped. It was never true. I knew it wasn't true when I was doing it, and I did it anyway. Amara said nothing. "I came here to find you," Vanessa said. "Not because they told me to. I mean, they contacted me first, the Crimson Dragon, and I..." She closed her eyes. "I took money from them, information about you, about where you might be, and I told myself I was going to find you anyway. I was going to find you and fix it, and the money was just..." She opened her eyes. "I told myself a lot of things. I'm good at that." Amara looked at her sister for a long moment. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere inside the house, one of the boys shifted in sleep. A small sound, a rustling, then quiet again. "Did you know about the boys?" Amara said. "When you gave them information." Vanessa flinched. "No, I swear to you I didn't know about..." She stopped. "I knew you'd left Sol pregnant. Mom told me. But I didn't know if you'd..." She couldn't finish that sentence. "You knew I was pregnant when you gave them information about where I might be." Vanessa didn't look away. "Yes." The answer sat between them on the gravel. Amara turned and went back inside. She didn't slam the door. She didn't close it. She left it open, which Vanessa understood after a moment, and walked through. Jite was in the kitchen. He'd found a dish towel and was holding it against the cut above his ear with the matter-of-fact relationship to his own physical damage of a man who had been getting hurt for a long time and had reached an accommodation with it. He looked up when Amara came in. She sat across from him at the table. She said, "Is it over?" "Jew is in custody. My people will hand him to law enforcement contacts in Lisbon in the morning. There's enough on the Crimson Dragon's Portugal operation to make that stick for a while. His network here is finished." He paused. "The organization itself isn't finished. They'll regroup, but not in the same configuration and not with the same leadership." "Will they come back?" He considered the honest answer versus the comfortable one. He gave her the honest one. "Not for you. Not for the boys. I'll make sure of it." "How?" "By being sufficiently clear about the consequences." He said it without elaboration. She understood what it meant. She looked at the table, at her hands. "Your person, Lim. She'll be dealt with." "What does that mean?" "It means she'll face consequences for what she did. I'm not going to..." He stopped, started again. "I'm trying to be a different kind of man than the one I was. That's going to look different from what dealing with things used to look like." He looked at her directly. "She'll be handed to the same law enforcement contacts. There's enough evidence." Amara studied his face. looking for the calculation, the managed surface, the performance. She found the cut above his ear instead, and the jaw and the eyes that were still raw from the chemical agent, and the specific quality of a man who had run himself entirely empty in the past 8 hours and was still sitting at the table. She got up. She found a first aid kit under the sink. She was a mother of 5-year-old boys. She knew where first aid kits were in any space she inhabited for more than a week. She brought it back to the table and sat beside him instead of across from him. He went very still. She cleaned the cut above his ear. She did it efficiently and without commentary, the way she did practical things, directly, without theater. He didn't move. He barely breathed. She could feel the stillness in him, the particular quality of a man who is afraid to disturb a moment he doesn't believe he deserves. When she was done, she capped the antiseptic and put it back in the kit and didn't move away from him. She said, "I'm not ready to forgive you." "I know. I might not get there. I don't know." "That's—" He exhaled. "That's honest. I'd rather have honest. I know what you are, what you run, what the Black Phoenix means." She looked at the table. "I knew when I was with you and I chose to stay. I'm not pretending I didn't know. You shouldn't have had to choose." "No, but I did. And then you made me choose again and I chose differently." She looked at him. "I chose my children." "You chose correctly." She held his gaze. "You said you're trying to be a different kind of man." "Yes. Trying is not the same as being." "No, it's not." "And the organization." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been, over the past 18 months, before any of this, I've been working on a transition, legitimate business holdings, the pharmaceutical distribution network, the tech investments. Those are clean. The rest is more complicated to extract from, but I've been extracting." He paused. "I don't know how to hand you a timeline and tell you trust it. I just know that's what I've been doing." She was quiet for a long time. From outside, the ocean said nothing useful. The pines moved. Somewhere in the back of the house, Micah made a sound in his sleep that might have been a word, indistinct, then went quiet. "They're extraordinary," Jite said, quietly, like he was saying it to the table rather than to her. I barely looked at them for an hour total tonight, and I can see who they already are." He stopped. Micah asked me directly, just straight at it. "And Jordan?" He paused again. "Jordan decided something before I opened my mouth. I could see him decide it." "Jordan decides things before other people have finished thinking them," she said. "It's going to be a problem when he's 15. He'll be formidable at 15. He's formidable at 5. She almost smiled. "Almost." "They both are." The almost smile faded. She looked at her hands again. "I can't go back to what we were," she said. "That's not available. I'm telling you clearly so you don't build something in your head that doesn't exist." "I understand." "But the boys need their father, not a stranger who visits, not a man who funds their life from a distance." She exhaled. "They need someone who shows up, consistently. Not because it's convenient, not because it serves something, just because they exist and they're his, and that's enough reason." "It's more than enough reason," he said. "It's the only reason that matters." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the broken open expression she'd seen on the dock in Cascais, the one without management in it, without control, the one that was just his face under everything else he'd built on top of it. She said, "We're going to Seoul." He went very still again. "Not for you," she said. "For them. They should know where half of them comes from. They should know the language, the city." She paused. "I'll have my own apartment, my own work, my own everything. You understand that?" "Yes." "If you interfere with any of that, I won't. If the organization ever comes close to them, it won't." Jite. She said his name the way she'd said it on that dock, when there was nothing else left. Just the name itself, just the sound of it. "I mean it. I'm not giving you a chance to prove yourself so you can use it. I'm bringing my children to their father's city, and I'm going to watch what you do. That's all this is right now." He nodded. "That's enough," he said. I know what that is. I'll take it." "Good." She stood up, put the first aid kit back under the sink. "Now go sleep somewhere. You look terrible." He made a sound that might, in different circumstances, have been a laugh. Vanessa slept in the car, not because anyone told her to, just because there was nowhere else. And the alternative was the main room of the house where Amara was, and the distance between them at 3 a.m. was not a distance that could be closed by proximity. So she sat in the back seat of Park's car with a blanket someone had found in the boot, and she looked at the pine trees against the sky and thought about the full sequence of everything she had done. She was good at narratives. She had always been good at building the version of events in which she was comprehensible, even sympathetic. It was one of the skills she'd developed in childhood, the younger sister's toolkit, the art of reframing, of being seen a certain way. She couldn't build that narrative tonight. The materials weren't there. What she had done was what it was, laid out in its actual shape. And the actual shape was, she had allowed a criminal organization to pay her for information about her pregnant sister's likely location. And she addressed it in language about her own wounds, and the language had been real. The wounds were real. But real wounds didn't make what she'd done anything other than what it was. She'd come to Cascais thinking she could fix it. She'd been wrong about that, which was maybe the truest sentence she'd ever assembled about herself. She was someone who consistently believed she could fix things after breaking them, which was a belief that served her more than it served anyone she'd ever broken anything with. Amara had left the door open. Not forgiveness, not welcome. Just open. Vanessa would figure out what to do with that. Not tonight. Tonight she was going to sit in the car under a blanket and look at the pine trees and not build a narrative about it. That was the most honest thing she could do. Morning came the way mornings do on the Portuguese coast. Gradually, then all at once, the light going from gray to gold with a specificity that felt almost argumentative, like the day insisting on itself. Amara was in the kitchen when Micah found her. He came in with his hair from sleep and his school shirt. He'd slept in it. And he went directly to the window and looked out at the cliff and the ocean below it with the expression of someone determining whether the new location was acceptable. He decided it was. He looked at his mother. "Is the bad stuff over?" "Yes," she said. "Is Dad still here?" She paused. "He's outside." Micah nodded like this was filed and processed. He poured himself a glass of water. He could reach the tap now, which was a recent development he was still clearly pleased about, and drank it and put the glass in the sink. Then he went outside. Amara watched through the window. Jite was at the property's low stone wall at the cliff edge, looking at the ocean. He'd found a dry shirt from somewhere, possibly the emergency kit in the car, and the morning light was doing no favors for the damage on his face, the swelling now fully developed, the cut above his ear covered with the dressing she'd put there. Micah walked up and stood beside him at the wall. They stood there together looking at the ocean, this man and this boy, for a long moment. Then Micah said something she couldn't hear through the glass. Jite looked down at him, listened, said something back. Micah nodded, said something else. Jite reached down and put his hand on the back of Micah's head. Briefly, carefully, the gesture of someone who was not certain of his welcome and was not taking more than he was given. Micah leaned into it slightly, just slightly. Jordan appeared at Amara's elbow. She hadn't heard him come in. He was looking through the window at the same scene, with that specific quality of attention he brought to everything. "I knew," Jordan said. She looked at him. "What did you know?" "That he would come." He watched his father and his brother at the wall. "I saw him at school, and I knew he was ours." He said it simply, the way he said everything, not performing certainty, just reporting it. "I told Micah, but Micah said I was being weird." Micah says that a lot. "Because I am, sometimes." He looked up at her. "Are we going somewhere new?" She looked at her son, 5 years old, Jitai's eyes in her face's structure, old in the specific way that some children are old, and she thought about soul, about the city she'd borrowed and fled and carried with her in the 5 years since, the language she still dreamed in some nights, the skyline she'd stood under with a man she loved before she understood completely what love cost when it went wrong. "Yes," she said, "somewhere we haven't been before." "Will it be good?" She looked out the window at Micah and Jitai at the wall, the ocean behind them, the morning light on the water. "I think it has a chance to be," she said. Jordan considered this with his head slightly tilted. Then, "That's not a yes or no." She looked down at him. "No," she said. "It's not." but it's honest. He nodded, accepting this the same way his brother had accepted the same formulation the night before, and went to the window to watch his father and his brother and the Atlantic morning, and Amara stood beside him and did the same. 6 months later, Seoul. The apartment she'd chosen was on the 14th floor of a building in Mapo-gu, the same district she'd once lived in for 3 years, which was either irony or instinct. She'd stopped trying to categorize it. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen window that faced east, a small study where she'd set up the translation work again. The same work, the same early mornings, the same organizing of thought into language. But different now, the way everything was different without being unrecognizable. Ji-tae's apartment was 12 minutes away by car. He came 3 evenings a week, and Saturday mornings without fail, and when work kept him from Saturday, he called and explained and rescheduled. She'd been watching for the first missed commitment, the first convenience that outweighed consistency, the first sign that the pattern would erode the way patterns did. It hadn't come yet. She didn't tell him she was watching, she just watched. He took Micah to a taekwondo class on Thursdays. Micah had informed him in the second week that he wanted to learn to fight, and Ji-tae had said he'd arrange it with the matter-of-fact practicality of a man who had no anxiety about that particular request. He sat in the observation area for the full hour every week and watched his son learn to fall correctly before he learned to hit anything, which Micah found profoundly unjust, and Ji-tae told him was the actual first lesson. Jordan had decided he wanted to learn Korean. Not slowly, not in the incremental way of formal classes. He wanted immersion, wanted to understand the city around him, wanted to know what people were saying. Ji-tae hired a tutor, a young woman who came to the apartment on Tuesday and Friday afternoons. And within 6 weeks, Jordan was conducting full, simple conversations with the building's front desk staff, who found him remarkable and said so to his face, which he accepted without false modesty. Micah was learning too. He was just louder about being bad at it. Amara moved through Seoul with the particular orientation of a woman who had once known this city as someone else's and was now learning it as her own. She walked neighborhoods she hadn't walked before. She found a bookshop in Insadong she liked and went back to it. She found a coffee place near the university where she'd done most of her old work and sat in it on weekday mornings with her laptop and her current contracts, and nobody in the coffee place knew what her life was, which was exactly how she preferred it. She spoke to her mother twice a week. Her mother had come to visit in the 3rd month, spent a week sleeping on the couch in the study, cooked every meal with the devoted excess of someone who had carried guilt and was paying it down in food, and cried twice. Once when she saw the boys, and once when she was alone in the kitchen thinking she wasn't being heard. Amara had heard. She had let her cry. Then she'd gone in and said nothing, and put her hand on her mother's back, and her mother had said, "I'm sorry," and Amara had said, "I know," and that was the sum of it, which was enough. Vanessa was in Atlanta. They spoke on the phone once a month, not because Amara had forgiven her, not with that word yet, not with the clean architecture of resolution that the word implied, but because Vanessa called and Amara answered, and they talked about small things, careful things, the shallow end of a pool they were both standing at the edge of. Vanessa had gotten a job. Vanessa had been seeing a therapist. Vanessa said these things in the tone of someone reporting evidence rather than asking for credit. Amara listened. She didn't give credit yet, but she listened. That was its own thing. Ji-tae was in the process of a transition that had no clean completion date. He'd brought in a management team 18 months before any of this happened. Legitimate business people, people with no knowledge of the organization's original architecture, to consolidate the pharmaceutical and technology holdings into something that would survive him stepping back from the other things. He was stepping back. It was slow. There were men who'd served him for years who didn't understand it, and others who'd seen it coming and had already made their own arrangements. He managed all of it the same way he'd managed everything in his life, methodically, with patience, without announcing what he was doing until it was already done. He did not tell Amara the details. She hadn't asked for them, which he understood to mean she was giving him the space to do it without surveillance, which was a kind of trust, even if she'd never have called it that. He showed up on the evenings he said he would. He showed up on Saturday mornings without fail. He learned what his sons needed, which was different for each of them and changed as they grew, and he adjusted and he came back. He did not ask Amara for anything more than she was giving. He did not touch her unless she initiated it, which happened sometimes. Once in the kitchen when he was helping the boys with something, and she'd put her hand on his arm briefly and then removed it. Once at the door when he was leaving, and she'd looked at him for a long moment, and he'd looked back, and neither of them had said anything. He did not push. He understood that the thing between them, whatever it was becoming, was not a thing you could push. It was a thing you had to stand next to long enough for it to become real on its own terms. He was willing to stand next to it for as long as it took. One Saturday morning in the 4th month, Micah said, at the breakfast table, Jitai had joined uninvited in the specific way Micah had developed of making the invitation implicit and therefore unnecessary. "Are you going to live with us?" Amara looked at her coffee. Jitai looked at Micah, then at Jordan, who was eating his rice with focused efficiency and not looking at anyone, which meant he was listening harder than anyone. "Not yet," Jitai said. "But maybe." "Maybe, if your mother decides that's what she wants." Micah looked at Amara. "Mom, do you want that?" She looked up from her coffee. She looked at her son, who had his father's eyes and her complete inability to pretend a question hadn't been asked. She looked at Jitai, who was looking at the table with that quality of deliberate stillness. She said, "I'm thinking about it." Micah appeared to find this satisfactory. He returned to his breakfast. Jordan looked up from his rice. He looked at Jitai. He looked at his mother. He looked at Jitai again. He said, in Korean, careful, still learning, but clear, "She's not saying no." Jitai looked at this boy, this precise, watchful, impossible boy, and felt something in his chest that had no name in any of the languages he spoke, something that was beyond gratitude and beyond love, and was instead the specific, terrible, extraordinary weight of having something to lose and knowing you would spend the rest of your life making sure you didn't. He said, in Korean, back to his son, "I know, I heard her." Jordan nodded, returned to his rice. Amara looked at Jitai across the table. He looked back at her. Outside the kitchen window, Seoul moved and breathed under the winter morning sky, the city going about its own enormous life, indifferent to the particular people at this particular table, which was appropriate, which was how it should be. Some things were too quiet and too real to need the city's attention. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no. Between those two things was everything. All the work still to be done, all the trust still to be rebuilt stone by slow stone, all the mornings ahead, all the school events and dinner tables and doorway moments that would either accumulate into something solid or they wouldn't. She hadn't said no. That was how it began again. Not with a grand declaration. Not with the erasure of everything that had happened. With a woman looking at a man across a kitchen table and deciding, for today, that the door was still open. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough.